Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
On Tuesday, President Trump met with newly elected Japanese Prime Minister, signing deals on rare earth minerals, nuclear power collaboration, as well as pledging to strengthen diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Japan.
I have always had a great love of Japan and a great respect of Japan. And I will say that this will be a relationship that will be stronger than ever before. And I look forward to working with you. And on behalf of our country, I want to just let you know, anytime you have any question, any doubt, anything you want, any favors you need, anything I can do to help Japan, we will be there. We are an ally at the strongest level.
While neither leader mentioned it publicly, their meeting came just days before President Trump is set to travel to South Korea for trade talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Meanwhile, at home, the government shutdown enters its fifth week as SNAP benefits for millions of Americans are expected to run out just days before key elections in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City. Lots to discuss here. Let's bring in our panel. Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory, Matt Gorman, Democratic campaign consultant Kevin Walling, and Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Chad, we are in for a long haul, it seems, but the sands seem to be shifting on the government shutdown with public unions weighing in and Democrats maybe feeling pressure from different places.
Well, the sands are shifting. We just don't know if this is quicksand, though. You're right. Everett Kelly, who's the head of the government union that represents about 800,000 federal employees, said we want an end to the shutdown. Now, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, he just indicated within the past bit that he spoke with Everett Kelly, and Democrats seem to be standing firm on their position that they want to fight for these Obamacare subsidies, and he said we can do both. So, yeah, you're right. That was a crack in the Democratic armor there. The other thing is that you're seeing people like John Fetterman, the Democrat from Pennsylvania. He continues to vote with the Republicans and a couple of other senators who caucus with the Democrats as well. 13 now, a record number of votes to be rejected in the Senate on this procedural matter to get to the Republican bill. But Fetterman noted that, Jose Andres, the renowned chef, has opened his food kitchen to federal workers who need to be fed, frankly. And he said it's just absurd that it's come to that. And then you have this question of SNAP food benefits, these emergency food benefits that affects about 40 million Americans. Those expire Saturday. So there's a tendency to think that maybe this is coming to a head here. You have federal workers missing paychecks. You have air traffic controllers on the job not getting paid. I talked about the food stuff. Maybe Lisa Murkowski is a Republican senator from Alaska. And she absolutely ripped her colleagues, said, we're just voting on judges and other things around here like it's average, quotidian business. And why aren't we trying to actually, get something done on this? Democrats, and Mark Kelly, the Democrat from Arizona, Richard Blumenthal, the Democrat from Connecticut, Democratic senator from Connecticut, they were asked about Vice President Vance coming to Capitol Hill today, and they said, look, I think it's the wrong person, basically, and talking to the wrong party. He met with the Senate Republicans. Remember that President Trump has only met with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer for about an hour just a couple of days before the shutdown. I pressed Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, on that earlier, and he said, well, that would be a waste of time. There's nothing to negotiate. So that indicates that the Republican position has not shifted. But this is where Mark Kelly kind of shot back and said, the president needs to be engaged in this. He has spent, only an hour on this issue and questioned how much time he had spent on the ballroom question down at the White House.
Yeah. Shelley Moore Capito, Republican from West Virginia, Kevin, said while every day gets better for Senator Schumer and his shutdown to every American's life is getting harder, Senate GOP has given Senate Democrats countless opportunities to open the government or at least pay our troops and federal workers. And that's a specific reference to the bill about just paying those who are working, including military and government workers. Is there pressure either way that's building?
Yeah, Brett, I think there is. And to Chad's point, I think we're going to reach a couple of these key touchstone dates. Obviously, November 1st is critical. We've talked about SNAP. We've talked about pay for our troops and government workers. the air traffic controllers, what have you. But it's also we're 4 days away from open enrollment, right? And this is where Senate Democrats are, wanting to focus on these premium questions around the ACA and the fact that you're going to see, 20 million Americans are going to see those premiums up close and personal, and that huge jump that we're going to see in terms of healthcare costs. And we'll see if that will provide some kind of push, some leverage to have these conversations continue. You had a great conversation with Ted Budd of North Carolina, Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada. They had just had that bipartisan lunch last week. You're seeing, I think, the backbencher senators having these ongoing conversations, seeing if they can win over 5 more Democrats to their fold. Obviously, the AFG issue with the federal government employees union, that may also provide some cover for Democrats to say, okay, we have tried our hardest. The president skipped town the first time we've seen a president leave during a government shutdown. We've fought the good fight. Let's come back to the table and see what we can get done with the House.
Matt, the SNAP benefits, a lot of things, as we said, are kicking in here. Republicans seem like they're trying. However, the president also, there's a part of him when he talks about it that seems to be open to, using this time to cut agencies by Russ Vought, who's known as Darth Vader in the economic world, trying to cut back on certain things. Is there benefit to Republicans somehow, or is this like time to get together and bust heads behind closed doors?
Well, it's getting very real, I think, to everyone's point. You're getting up against some hard deadlines and some hard payment dates that you can't, avoid. I think the best way I can describe it, it's a game of chicken where neither car is moving. But I think to what Chad's talked about a little bit earlier, I believe that, Republicans have the better car and the AC cranking right now, as you see with some splintering off with some of the unions, the air traffic controllers. There's a lot more pressure on Democrats from their natural constituencies to get a deal done. I think there's 2 essential truths here also. It's going to be hard for Schumer to find an off-ramp for this without looking like he's absolutely caving. It's like the old saying, the best thing about an elephant stepping on your foot is the feeling when they stop stepping on your foot. Because for the first time in a year, the far left base hasn't been, essentially screaming at the establishment side of the party, including Schumer. And it feels pretty good for them. So they have to walk this down, and it's going to be tough for them. But I did think it was notable when they had the government employees union, you also had the air traffic controllers union. And like I said, this is going to get real quick, and especially with SNAP. And I think you could see those cracks start to shift, especially with those backbench Democrats.
Panel, we'll hold it right there. Chad, the biggest meeting this week is obviously President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping talking about the trade deals, talking about TikTok, talking about the way forward on a number of fronts. But this all happens as the Supreme Court gets ready for these hearings on the tariff question and this November case. And how is Capitol Hill digesting that? The fact that that case could literally unwind what has been foreign policy and policy of this administration from the beginning.
Well, there's certainly some, Republicans even, who very quietly have talked about the reservations they had with the tariffs. They are true free traders, perhaps, who say, we need to get back to that. And they might, quietly appreciate some of that. You certainly have people in the ag sector when the president talks about, the Chinese aren't buying any soybeans. And there's the issue about trying to help Argentina. Those are not free market economy, old Reagan-esque Barry Goldwater conservative Republican viewpoints that we're going to, send over a chunk of money to help the farmers just because, they're getting the screws put to them by the Chinese or something like that. I think that most Republicans still, even though they are aligned with President Trump, when you get to them, that they are still free traders and they would like for the markets to figure this out. That said, publicly, most of them are very supportive of the president's tariff policies. And this is kind of reflective of back in the late winter, early spring, that a lot of Republicans were willing to give the president as much deference as possible in trade and say, let's see how this works out. Let's see, how this is going, what's going to happen. Well, now that we're deeper down there and you talk about that Supreme Court case, if they rule against the administration and that completely changes the foreign policy, guess what? That's not the only issue of foreign policy that they're dealing with here. What I'm hearing increasingly from both some Democrats and Republicans is the legality of what they're doing in the Caribbean. Again, when President Trump, that seems to be the emerging foreign policy here with the president. When they are, just not interdicting with these boats and everything, they're killing folks. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, indicated that you have to have some sort of an authorization to be involved there. And remember that this was the president who campaigned on keeping us out of foreign conflicts. You can make the argument that, yes, they're interdicting drugs, although there's been some question about that coming into the United States, but you just can't willy-nilly go around doing that. And there's some question about whether the commander of the Southern Command stepped aside very early because he disagreed with the policy. So that's the two foreign policy questions here on Capitol Hill emerging, even though the president is overseas in Asia.
And Matt, it seems like the president may want some backing from Republicans. I mean, he kind of put forward that increase of Canada based on an ad he saw, and that obviously raises questions about, using this emergency act for tariffs. But it may be that they're looking for some backing up on Capitol Hill before the Supreme Court hearing to kind of lay out that there is support for what he's doing.
Yeah, I think certainly that backing helps. I'm also pretty optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to uphold this because IEEPA, which is the law that kind of governs this tariff authority that the White House is using, it's also the underpinning of about 45 or 50 years of sanctions like you'd have in Iran or even in Russia, aside from going through Congress. And I fail to believe that the Roberts Court, which, as we know, tends to be very deferential to the executive and its executive power, is going to suddenly constrict in this one area, especially when there's 6 votes, not even just 5. So I think that is fairly safe for now. And I think you're right, whether it's Canada, certainly if he meets with President Xi Jinping later this week, on if there's a tariff deal to be struck, or at least something on, say, soybeans, on agriculture they can take back to the United States and sell it as a win in advance of more China meetings. Progress on this, I think, is really important for Republicans to show that they're not at a stalemate.
Meantime, Kevin, we're closing in a week away from Election Day 2025, and obviously there's a lot of focus on New York City and what's happening with Mamdani and that race. It's got a lot of oxygen. However, New Jersey and Virginia, are Democrats getting a little apprehensive, tentative about those single-digit leads?
Well, Brett, you know me as a Democrat, we're always nervous about every single election that we go into. So certainly, the polling has tightened in recent weeks. Obviously, we've talked at length in Virginia, the Commonwealth, about the issue with the Attorney General's race overshadowing some of the issues with Jay Jones. On your program, I was early on to say he should drop out of that race because I fear of ramifications up and down that ballot. But obviously, Spanberger is running hard. The interesting thing, of course, in Virginia, too, is this new element of redistricting and Democrats making a play. It's taken the lieutenant governor off the campaign trail. She was railing about that today on the steps of the Capitol, where it comes to Democrats trying to match what they're seeing in other states like Texas, Indiana, other places to provide Democrats more seats. In New Jersey, obviously, I talked to a lot of folks there. I grew up in the state. They're hopeful from what they're seeing in the early vote, both in person and in the mail ballots for Mikey Sherrill. Obviously, as you just pointed out on Martha's program, President Trump actually cut that margin from 16 points in 2020 to just 6 points in 2024. So the idea that there's New Jersey, this liberal bastion that I grew up in, is really not the case. So obviously, both candidates and campaigns are running hard in this final week to go.
Yeah. Last thing, Chad, the redistricting question that Kevin talks about, I'm out at the Reagan Library, and Prop 50 is a big deal in California, whether Gavin Newsom gets the ability from the voters to do that. That could be 4 or 5 seats towards the Democrats. But you look around the map, there are a lot of states doing it. And then again, you look to the Supreme Court, and this decision, however it comes down on the Voting Rights Act, I mean, you could talk about 20 to 30 seats shifting.
I think it is absolutely impossible right now to be able to game out properly what you think, the House races will look like in the midterm, simply because we just don't understand the playing field. We don't know the dimensions of the wall. We know in Dodger Stadium in the World Series last night, there was the home run to dead center field. It's 395 feet to dead center at Dodger Stadium. It's been that way for decades. It's 330 down the lines. We have no idea what this field looks like because, you look at the maps that they used in 2024. You get into redistricting in California and Texas and maybe Ohio and maybe Missouri and maybe Indiana and even Virginia now. So, again, you have to really concentrate one by one once we understand what that map is, because on its face, it's a slim majority right now for the Republicans. And that's tenuous at best. But yes, we frankly just don't know. And until we get those maps and really understand how people are running, and maybe some of these are held up and maybe they aren't. If the Supreme Court, next May or June says, OK, we're going to throw out that portion of the Voting Rights Act, and there's about 20 seats that we thought were Democratic or marginally Democratic, and suddenly are very much in the Republican camp, that completely changes the scope of the field. The other thing, though, I will say, is that Republicans have tinkered with fire just a bit here, because when you do this in Texas and you have a pretty big majority, what you're starting to dilute already in the state delegation are these Republican districts. And maybe, if the political wind is blowing the other direction, Democrats might actually be able to pick up a couple of those seats. And that's why I think it is really hard to game out what the House will look like next year.
Well, we shall see in coming months. Panel, thanks so much. Now for a bit of history. On October 28th, 1919, the Volstead Act was passed by Congress, ratifying the 18th Amendment and establishing a nationwide ban on alcohol. While prohibition was intended to improve public health, morals, and productivity, the ban on alcohol had several unintended consequences, such as a sharp rise in organized crime and a decline in tax revenue. The 18th Amendment was repealed on December 5th, 1933, after the prospect of alcohol-related jobs became too good to ignore for an economy grappling with the Great Depression. To this day, the 18th Amendment is the only constitutional amendment to be repealed. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Matt, Kevin, and Chad, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.